Oh no, big problems for Chris Matheson. That's nasty.
Oh, Vonnie's in the netting! Oh my goodness me!
The most frightening deaths ever recorded in the entire world happened right there on the Olympic stage. These games are supposed to celebrate the absolute peak of human strength and unity. But within seconds, everything turns so dark and ugly. Competitors suddenly slump in front of thousands of screaming witnesses. Some lost their lives due to shockingly cheap mistakes. Others predicted their deaths right there on the tracks. These are the most horrifying Olympic tragedies ever captured, and what you are about to see will stay with you for a very long time. Nicolas Bochatay. Nicolas Bochatay kissed his daughter that morning and told her he was going to make her proud, and he died just hours later. Nicolas was a carpenter from Switzerland. He was not a wealthy professional athlete with sponsors and a support team. He was a father of 2 small children who also happened to be the best speed skier in his entire country, and that day was the day it all meant something. It was February 22nd, 1992 at the Winter Olympics in Albertville, France. Nicolas had qualified for the Olympic final in speed skiing. Now, before this story gets darker, you need to understand what speed skiing actually is. These athletes do not turn, they do not slow down. They point themselves straight down a mountain and go as fast as a human body can possibly travel on snow. Nicolas had clocked 130 miles per hour in qualifying. That's faster than most cars ever go on a highway. That morning before the final, he went out with teammates for a warm-up run on a public slope next to the competition course. A routine thing, nothing to worry about. He launched down that slope feeling the cold air and the speed, but just a few minutes more, and something deeply horrifying would happen. Nicolas hit a small bump and went briefly into the air. What happened next should not have happened if someone had just done their job right. As Nicolas came back down, a massive snow grooming machine was right there in his path. It had absolutely no business being on that slope during Olympic warm-up hours, with athletes coming down at over 100 miles per hour, and that machine was about to take his life. Immediately, Nicolas saw it. His entire body jerked violently as he tried to turn away, but it was late. Too late. His heart exploded into panic. His daughter flashed through his mind. His wife, his children waiting for him at the games. Not like this. Please not like this, he prayed. What happened next sealed his fate. Nicolas slammed into the machine with horrifying force, and his body was thrown through the air before smashing into the snow. Pain ripped through him. Something inside him shattered instantly. He could feel it. His chest, his ribs. For one terrible moment, he was still conscious. He tried to breathe. Nothing came. His mouth opened, but only blood spilled out onto the snow beneath him. Teammates screamed and rushed toward him, but Nicolas could already feel himself slipping away. The freezing mountain air burned inside what was left of his lungs. His vision shook violently. Somewhere deep inside his mind, something kept screaming that he had tried. He had fought his whole life for this moment. He was supposed to race in an Olympic final, go home to his children. Instead, he lay broken in the snow, staring into a white sky, while voices screamed around him. Then, everything went black. He didn't make it. And what happened afterward made it even uglier. Officials immediately claimed the grooming machine had warning sirens and flashing lights activated the entire time. Nicolas's teammates said that was a lie. They said the machine had been sitting there silently hidden behind that hill with no warning at all. One side was telling the truth. The other was protecting itself over the body of a dead man. No one was punished. No one truly answered for it. Not one official was ever named. 2 of his teammates were so horrified, they refused to race afterward. Speed skiing was removed from the Olympic program after those games and never came back. Not as a response to Nicolas's death. As a scheduling decision, his death did not even get the dignity of being the stated reason the sport was gone. Nodar Kumaritashvili. Nodar Kumaritashvili told his father he was afraid of the track. He had felt something wrong during training, something deadly. The speed was too violent. The curves came too fast. His body kept warning him over and over that something terrible was waiting on that ice. Nodar was a luger from the country of Georgia, competing at his very first Olympic Games. Luge is one of the most terrifying sports on earth. Athletes lie completely flat on a tiny sled, no bigger than a surfboard, and hurtle down a narrow tube of ice at speeds approaching 90 miles per hour. There are no brakes. There is almost no protection. One mistake at that speed, and the consequences are catastrophic. Nodar came from a family where luge ran 3 generations deep. His great-grandfather had helped build Georgia's very first luge track decades before Nodar was born. His father had dedicated his life to the sport. Getting to these Olympics was not just Nodar's dream. It was everything his entire family had sacrificed and built together across 3 generations. This was the 2010 Vancouver Winter Olympics, and the Whistler luge track being used for these games was the fastest ever built. Speeds on that track were pushing past anything the sport had ever seen before. And athletes from smaller countries like Georgia had been given far less practice time on that track than Canadian athletes because the host country had been quietly keeping the track for themselves to boost their own medal chances. Nodar had less time to prepare on a track that was already more dangerous than anything he had ever trained on in his life. He knew it. He said it to his father directly. And the next morning, he still climbed onto the sled anyway because Olympians do not stop after sacrificing their entire lives to reach that point. He pushed off. The sled exploded forward beneath him. Ice blurred past at terrifying speed, while the walls of the track became streaks of white and steel. His face tightened against the force crushing his body downward. Curve after curve hammered into him, while the sled kept accelerating. Then the final turn arrived, and suddenly something went wrong. Nodar felt it instantly. His stomach dropped. The sled lifted beneath him. His hands fought desperately for control, but it was already too late. The sled had lifted completely off the ice and thrown him over the side of the track. Suddenly, he was airborne, flying. Nothing beneath him but air, and directly in front of him was a thick steel pillar holding up the roof of the track. No padding on it, no protection of any kind, just raw metal rushing toward him at nearly 90 miles per hour. Nodar squeezed his eyes shut, harder than he ever had in his life. Then came the impact. The sound was sickening. People in the stands screamed immediately. One woman covered her mouth and started crying before medics even reached him. Nodar's body slammed onto the ice, twisted and broken. Medical staff sprinted toward him. One dropped beside him, yelling frantically, "You are going to make it! Stay with us!" But Nodar already knew the truth. He could feel death moving through him. Something inside his chest was broken beyond repair. Cold spread slowly through his body, while the voices around him sounded farther away every second. He tried to speak. Nothing came out. Medics kept working over him, while blood stained the ice beneath his head. Hours before the Olympic opening ceremony, he was airlifted to hospital. He never came back. And then the people responsible stood in front of cameras and blamed him. They said he failed to steer correctly. Yet within hours, they raised the walls of the track. They padded the exposed steel pillars. They lowered the starting point because the speeds were too dangerous. They already knew. Internal emails later revealed that 11 months before Nodar died, the head of the Vancouver organizing committee had received a warning that the track was too fast and someone could get seriously hurt. He wrote back that if an athlete was killed, the case could be made because they had been warned and had done nothing. He wrote those words in March 2009. Nodar died in February 2010. The warning existed. It was written down. The track stayed exactly as it was. Nodar told his father he was afraid. The track killed him exactly the way he feared it would. Alice Hawthorne. This one is one of the most tragic Olympic deaths ever. Fallon Stubbs lifted her camera to take a picture of her mother. Then, a bomb exploded. Before we get to that moment, you need to know who these two people were and why they were there. Alice Hawthorne was 44 years old. She owned a small ice cream shop back home in Albany, Georgia, that she had named after her youngest daughter, Fallon. She had spent months saving money to bring Fallon to the 1996 Atlanta Summer Olympics as a birthday gift. Fallon was turning 14. They were standing in Centennial Olympic Park on a warm July night watching a live concert. Alice was smiling. Fallon raised her camera to capture that smile. Then the bomb went off. A man named Eric Rudolph had hidden a backpack packed with pipe bombs and nails and screws beside a sound tower in the park. He had planted it to send a political message about abortion. He wanted to embarrass the United States government in front of the entire watching world. Alice Hawthorne had nothing to do with his cause. She owned an ice cream shop. She named it after her daughter. She came to Atlanta to give her child the happiest birthday of her life. The blast ripped through Centennial Olympic Park with such force it felt like the ground itself had shattered. Fallon was thrown backward violently as smoke and screams swallowed everything around her. People crashed into each other trying to run. The music stopped instantly and was replaced by chaos, so loud it barely sounded human anymore. Fallon hit the pavement hard. Her ears rang violently. For a second, she could not understand what had happened. Then she remembered her mother. "Mom!" Panic exploded inside her chest. Smoke rolled across the park while people screamed and stumbled through debris. Fallon forced herself up and started searching desperately through the chaos. Then she saw Alice. Her mother was lying motionless on the ground. Something about the way her body looked made terror slam into Fallon immediately. She ran toward her, screaming uncontrollably. Her legs nearly collapsed beneath her as she dropped beside her mother and grabbed her hand. "Mom, please! Mom!" Alice did not answer. A piece of the bomb had ripped through her body with force. People rushed around them, crying and yelling for help. A medic finally reached Alice and checked for a pulse. The expression on his face changed instantly. Fallon saw it. She grabbed harder onto her mother's hand, as if refusing to let death take her away. But Alice Hawthorne was already gone. Olympic lights still flashed over the park behind her. 111 people were injured that night. Alice was the only person killed directly by the blast itself. Fallon was taken to hospital wounded and completely alone while her father drove through the night trying to reach her. Meanwhile, the man responsible disappeared into darkness. Eric Rudolph vanished and evaded capture for 7 years. He was eventually found eating food from trash cans in North Carolina. But before that happened, something else devastating occurred. A security guard named Richard Jewell had actually spotted the suspicious backpack before the bomb went off and had started moving people away from it. He may have saved dozens of lives that night. Within days, the FBI leaked his name to the media as their prime suspect. He spent 88 days as the most hated man in America. His face was on every front page. His name was dragged through everything. He was completely innocent. The man who actually planted the bomb was eating from trash cans while an innocent man's life was being destroyed. Years later, Fallon stood in court facing Eric Rudolph at his sentencing. She said she forgave him, not because he deserved it, but because hatred was destroying what little remained inside her. Then she spoke directly to her mother's memory. She said she finally told Alice they caught the man who took her away, that she could rest now. Francisco Lázaro. Francisco Lázaro could feel his body burning alive long before he collapsed. Every breath hurt. Every step felt heavier than the one before it. But he kept running anyway because he was carrying an entire country on his back. This is the story of Francisco Lázaro. He was 24 years old. He was a carpenter from Lisbon, Portugal, who spent his days working with his hands and dreaming about something bigger than the factory waiting for him back home. He was also the first Olympic athlete Portugal had ever sent to the Games. Not just a runner, the flag bearer, the man chosen to carry Portugal's flag into the opening ceremony of his country's very first Olympic appearance at the 1912 Stockholm Games. An entire nation was watching him. An entire nation was hoping through him. Before the race, he had covered himself in wax, believing it would protect him from the sun and help him run faster. Here is why that decision killed him. Your skin sweats to cool your body down. That is how your body stops itself from overheating when you push it hard. The wax sealed every single pore on Francisco's skin, completely shut. His body's cooling system was gone. Every mile he ran in that brutal 90-degree Swedish summer heat generated enormous amounts of heat inside him, with absolutely nowhere for that heat to escape. At first, he ignored the warning signs. Olympians are trained to suffer, but mile after mile, something terrifying started happening inside him. His vision blurred. His heartbeat slammed violently against his ribs. The road beneath him twisted strangely. Crowds watching from the roadside saw him stumbling unevenly, like a man trying desperately not to fall. Francisco knew something was wrong, very wrong, but quitting never entered his mind. He was Portugal's first Olympian. He was carrying his country's flag. He could not stop. There were no medical teams stationed along that course. No water stations, no emergency systems prepared for an athlete collapsing from catastrophic heat stroke. Nobody whose job it was to pull a dying man out of a race. So he kept running while his body literally destroyed itself from the inside, mile by mile. Then finally, his legs failed. Francisco collapsed face first into the dirt road so hard the impact barely even registered. His body temperature had climbed beyond 105 degrees. He was burning alive beneath his own skin. People rushed toward him, shouting frantically. Francisco could hear them, but their voices sounded distant now, far away, like he was already leaving the world behind. He tried to breathe. His chest barely moved. His thoughts scattered wildly through his mind. Portugal, his wife, the Olympic flag. He had wanted so badly to make his country proud. Instead, he was dying alone on a road thousands of miles from home. There were no proper medical teams waiting nearby. No emergency systems prepared for this. Francisco was carried away barely conscious. He never woke up again. Before the race, he had reportedly told people around him something haunting. Either I win or I die. At the time, it sounded like courage. Hours later, it became a prophecy. Back in Portugal, his wife waited desperately for news about her husband. Instead, she learned that the first Olympian her country had ever sent to the Games was dead. The Olympics collected donations for her afterward, a small amount of money. That was what her husband's life was worth to the institution that had sent him out onto that course with no water and no medical help and no way to save him. Knud Enemark Jensen. Knud Enemark Jensen was barely conscious and still trying to pedal. His teammates were physically holding him upright on the bicycle because his body was already shutting down beneath them. One rider gripped his jersey from the left. Another held him from the right. They could feel him collapsing, but they kept going anyway. That's how Knud Enemark lost his life during the Olympic. Knud was 23 years old and one of Denmark's finest cyclists. It was August 26, 1960 at the Rome Summer Olympics. The event was the team time trial. In a team time trial, all the riders race together, and the team's finishing time is measured by when the third rider crosses the line. If one rider drops out, the team is disqualified, which meant every single one of them had to finish no matter what. The heat in Rome that day was absolutely savage. More than 100 degrees baking directly onto the open road course with no shade and no shelter for nearly 3 hours of racing. 31 riders from different countries abandoned the race that day simply because their bodies could not survive the conditions. One of Jensen's own teammates fell apart in the heat and had to let the group go. That left 3 Danish riders who all had to finish, or the team would lose everything they had worked for. Knud had already told his teammates he felt dizzy, like something terrible was happening inside him. Then his eyes started glazing over. His body sagged dangerously. Still, they held him upright and forced forward because stopping meant losing everything. Knud kept pedaling through pure instinct while his brain drowned inside unbearable heat. Then his body finally gave out completely. He collapsed sideways off the bicycle and smashed headfirst into the pavement with a horrifying crack that made nearby spectators physically recoil. He was not wearing a helmet. His skull slammed directly against the road. People screamed for medics. Knud lay motionless while officials and teammates crowded around him in panic. His chest barely moved. His face looked empty. Yet somehow he was still alive when they loaded him into an ambulance and rushed him to a military medical tent near the finish line. Then came the part that feels impossible to believe. The temperature inside that tent was 122 degrees Fahrenheit. A man already dying from catastrophic heat stroke was placed inside what was essentially an oven. The people trying to save him put him in a space that was hotter than the road he had just collapsed on. Doctors fought desperately while his organs failed one after another beneath the crushing heat. Knud never regained consciousness. He died there that afternoon. And what happened after his death is almost as horrifying as the collapse itself. Officials began spreading claims that drugs had caused his death, performance enhancers. The story exploded internationally, but the actual autopsy conducted by 3 Italian doctors found no evidence of drugs inside Knud's body. None. The official cause of death was heat stroke and a skull fracture from the fall. Knud Enemark Jensen died twice, first on the road in Rome, then again when the truth about what killed him was buried beneath a lie built to serve someone else's agenda. Gernot Reinstadler. Gernot Reinstadler was still sliding when spectators realized his legs were bent in ways human legs are never supposed to bend. His body scraped violently across the ice, leaving dark streaks of blood behind him, while horrified silence spread through the mountain crowd. Gernot Reinstadler was only 20 years old when this happened. He came from a skiing family in the deepest possible sense. His mother had been a competitive skier who reached international podiums. His father was a ski instructor who had worked in Japan and Australia. Skiing was not just his sport, it was his family's entire identity going back a generation. Austrian coaches described him as their downhiller of the future, the most promising young talent the sport had seen in years. It was January 18, 1991, at the Lauberhorn course in Wengen, Switzerland, one of the most famous and demanding downhill ski courses in the entire world. Gernot was there for a qualifying run that would earn him his place in the Senior World Cup field for the very first time. This was the moment his whole career had been building toward. He attacked that course with the fearlessness that had made coaches believe he could become one of the greatest skiers in the world. Then everything went wrong in seconds. Coming into the final S curve, Gernot lost balance slightly at enormous speed. One tiny mistake, barely visible to anyone watching. But downhill skiing punishes tiny mistakes with absolute brutality. His body launched toward the safety netting at the edge of the course. Safety netting lines the sides of ski courses to stop athletes from flying off into open terrain. But what happened next turned that safety feature into a trap. The tip of one ski punched directly through one of the holes in the net and locked there instantly. His body kept moving. The ski stopped. The force ripped through him catastrophically. People heard him scream. The sound echoed across the slope while his pelvis shattered apart internally. His body twisted violently before slamming face first into the snow. Ski officials sprinted toward him. Some stopped halfway because the sight was too horrifying. Gernot was still conscious for moments after the crash. He tried desperately to move, but pain exploded through him so he could barely breathe. He knew something inside him had been destroyed. Medics fought frantically to stabilize him before airlifting him to the hospital in Interlaken, Switzerland. Surgeons worked for 6 hours through the night, trying to stop the catastrophic internal bleeding tearing through his body. They could not save him. Shortly after midnight, Gernot Reinstadler died. He never even reached his first senior World Cup race. Then came the coldness afterward. Officials admitted accidents like this would probably happen again, no matter what safety measures existed. That was it. That was the response over a 20-year-old boy's grave. After his death, organizers simply made the holes in the safety net smaller, so skis would not catch as easily again. Bahman Golbarnezhad. Bahman Golbarnezhad was still alive when they lifted him into the ambulance. Barely. His chest jerked violently with weak, uneven breaths, while paramedics shouted over each other, trying to keep him conscious. Blood ran beneath his helmet straps. One medic kept pressing against his body, while another screamed for the driver to move faster. Bahman's eyes fluttered weakly. He was trying to stay alive. Then somewhere on the road between the mountain and the hospital, his heart stopped. The monitor flatlined. Panic exploded inside the ambulance. Paramedics immediately threw themselves onto him, trying desperately to restart his heart, while the vehicle raced through Brazilian streets. Hands hammered against his chest. Voices screamed his name. Equipment crashed against the walls during the chaos. Nothing worked. Bahman Golbarnezhad died inside that moving ambulance while help sat only minutes away. He was 48 years old. And before we go any further, you need to understand who this man actually was, because his story is one of the most extraordinary things you will ever hear. Bahman was competing at the 2016 Rio Paralympics. The Paralympics are the Olympic Games specifically for athletes with physical disabilities, the very highest level of competition for people who have overcome extraordinary physical challenges to become world-class athletes. And Bahman Golbarnezhad was Iran's sole representative in road cycling. His entire nation looked at him as proof that a human being could survive almost anything, because of what he had already survived. When Bahman was 20 years old, he was serving as a soldier in the Iran-Iraq War when he stepped on a landmine. The explosion tore his left leg completely off his body. He was 20 years old. His leg was gone. Most people would have surrendered to despair after something like that. Bahman rebuilt himself instead. He became a Paralympic weightlifting champion, winning 12 gold medals through sheer refusal to break. 12 gold medals. Then when injuries destroyed that career, he rebuilt himself again and became a Paralympic cyclist in his late 30s. By 2016, he was at the Rio Games representing his country. The road race course ran through the mountainous Grumari Loop area outside Rio. Brutal steep descents, sharp turns, unforgiving speed. On a downhill section, Bahman lost control and slammed violently into a rock. The impact destroyed him instantly and launched him hard against the ground. People nearby screamed. Cyclists behind him swerved desperately. Medical teams rushed toward him and immediately understood how serious it was. Bahman lay twisted against the pavement, struggling to breathe while blood spread beneath his head. Still he fought. Still he tried to survive, because that was who he had always been, a survivor, until finally even his body had nothing left. His son was back home in Iran when the news arrived, not at the games, home, alone. His mother had already died of cancer years earlier. Now his father was gone too. One morning, he had a father competing at the Paralympics. By nightfall, he was completely alone in the world. The next day, Iranian athletes dedicated their victories to Bahman through tears while flags lowered to half-mast across the entire Paralympic village. The Iranian volleyball team won gold that very next day and dedicated it to his memory, while grown men wept openly on the court. That is what makes this story unbearable. War could not kill him. A landmine could not kill him. Decades of pain could not kill him. But one terrible descent on a mountain road in Brazil finally did. Kazimierz Kay-Skrzypeski. The younger athletes called him Uncle. At 58 years old, Kazimierz Kay-Skrzypeski was the oldest competitor at the 1964 Innsbruck Winter Olympics, and the most unlikely athlete in the entire Games. He was not supposed to be there, not at his age. Not in a sport as brutally dangerous as luge, where athletes lie flat on a tiny sled and hurl themselves down an ice track at terrifying speeds. But Kazimierz had spent his whole life doing things he was not supposed to be able to do. He was Polish-born, a trained architect, a Royal Air Force pilot who had flown combat missions during the Second World War. He had survived things that would have broken most men completely. After the war, he fled Poland and built an entirely new life in Britain from nothing. And somewhere in his 50s, he discovered luge and fell completely in love with it. He earned his place on the British team for these games, where luge was making its very first Olympic appearance. The younger athletes respected him deeply. They gave him that nickname Uncle, and they meant it with everything they had. But the Innsbruck luge track was deeply dangerous, and people already knew it. Sections of the track were waterlogged. The ice was unpredictable and uneven. Journalists covering the games had already written openly that athletes were flipping instead of finishing clean runs. Formal safety complaints had been made to the organizers before the games even began. Those complaints were filed away and ignored. On January 21, 1964, Kazimierz took a practice run. His sled began vibrating violently beneath him, and before he could do anything about it, the sled veered off the track completely and launched him into the air. He hit the ground with enormous force. His skull fractured, his pelvis shattered, and yet somehow he survived that night. His body held on. Doctors stabilized him. The next morning, surgeons prepared to operate and try to save him properly. His heart stopped on the operating table. They could not bring it back. Kazimierz Kay-Skrzypeski died before the Olympic Games. He had traveled to compete and had even officially opened. The opening ceremony was still 8 days away. He never got to compete in the sport he loved on the biggest stage in the world. He made it all the way to the Olympics and died in a hospital before the flame was even lit. And then came the response that made everything worse. Instead of addressing the waterlogged, dangerous track that multiple people had already complained about, officials allowed a quiet suggestion to spread through the channels. The suggestion was that perhaps the problem had been his age, that a 58-year-old man simply had no business competing at that level. Not that the track was dangerous, not that warnings had been ignored. The old man was the problem. The track was fine. New safety features were added to the dangerous sections of the track after his death. He survived a world war. He built a whole new life in a new country from nothing. He fell in love with a sport at 58 years old and chased it all the way to the Olympic Games. And the track that should never have been built the way it was built killed him before he could take a single official run. And the people who built it looked at his age and decided that was all the explanation anyone needed. Ross Milne. He saw the group of people standing directly in his path, and he did not hesitate for a single second. He swerved to avoid them. That instinct to protect others was the last decision Ross Milne ever made. He lost control the moment he swerved. He flew off the course and slammed headfirst into a tree at over 80 kilometers per hour. He was 19 years old. He was declared dead on arrival at hospital. His name was Ross Milne. He was a farm boy from Myrtleford in Victoria, Australia, and the finest alpine skier his country had ever produced. He had spent the previous winter racing in Europe, proving himself on the world stage. He had earned his place at the 1964 Innsbruck Winter Olympics through genuine ability and real sacrifice. He was not there by luck. He belonged there. But from the moment the Australian team arrived, it was clear that something was badly wrong with how these games had been set up. There was almost no natural snow the winter in Innsbruck. Organizers had rushed courses together, using truckloads of imported snow with almost no proper safety infrastructure. Trees lined the downhill course with nothing between them and the racing line except a few scattered sandbags. Sandbags against trees, on a course where men would be traveling at over 80 kilometers per hour. On January 25th, Ross launched from the start on his first official practice run. The course was dangerously overcrowded with roughly 100 athletes and spectators on it simultaneously because nobody was managing the situation properly. People who had absolutely no business being on that slope were standing right there in the racing line. Ross came flying down toward one of the steepest sections and saw that group blocking his path. He swerved, he hit the tree, he was gone, and then the people responsible did something that makes the blood run cold. The official organizing committee report described the spot where Ross died as an entirely innocuous part of the course. It said the safety measures in place were far above the normal level. The Australian team manager told a completely different story. He said the course had been dangerously overcrowded and that any world-class skier would probably have been in serious trouble in the same situation. He said the accident could have been prevented by proper course management. The official report ignored every word of that. Some European voices quietly suggested that perhaps athletes from countries like Australia and New Zealand simply should not be competing on difficult downhill courses. Ross had a younger brother named Malcolm. Malcolm was young when his brother died, but he heard every single word those officials said, and he decided he was going to answer them in the only language that mattered. He spent the next decade becoming one of the greatest downhill skiers in the world. In December 1969, Malcolm Milne became the first non-European in history to win a men's World Cup downhill race. He said directly afterward that the suggestion his brother had no business on that course was the fire that drove him forward every single day. Ross died trying to protect people who should never have been standing in his path. He gave his life for strangers on a course that should never have been run the way it was run. And his little brother made sure that sacrifice was never used to suggest his brother was anything less than the champion he truly was. Ignaz Stiefsohn. He felt the wing break. High above the ground, moving fast, he felt the aircraft change beneath him in the way that pilots feel before anything else registers in their brain. Something was catastrophically wrong. He reached for his parachute cord without hesitating and pulled it. He did everything he had been trained to do. He watched the parachute begin to billow open above him, and then the ground came up and took him anyway. At 700 meters, there was simply not enough sky left for the parachute to finish opening before he hit the earth. Ignaz Stiefsohn died on August 3, 1936. The gliding demonstration he had traveled to Berlin to lead went ahead the very next morning without him. The show did not pause for a single moment. His name was Ignaz Stiefsohn. He was 25 years old. He was an Austrian aviator and one of the most gifted glider pilots in his country. He ran his own gliding school. He had been selected to lead Austria's team at the 1936 Berlin Olympics because of everything he had built and mastered over years of dedication to his craft. Now here is something you need to understand about those particular Olympics before the full weight of his death lands properly. The 1936 Berlin Games were Adolf Hitler's games. They were designed from the ground up as a showcase of German power and racial superiority in front of the entire watching world. And gliding was selected as a demonstration sport for a very specific and very sinister reason. After World War I, Germany had been banned under the peace treaty from building a military air force. So, Germany had secretly spent years developing its military aviation capabilities through civilian gliding clubs. What looked like a sport was actually forbidden military technology being developed in disguise. The gliding demonstration at the 1936 Olympics was not really a sport. It was a performance of that forbidden military technology dressed in Olympic clothing and staged in front of the world's cameras so Germany could show what it had quietly been building. Ignaz Stiefsohn was Austrian, not German. He was a guest performer in someone else's propaganda show. The day before the official demonstration, he took his glider up for what should have been a routine preparation flight. The wing broke at 700 meters. He pulled the cord. The ground came up anyway. The next morning, the demonstration went ahead with 21 pilots from 7 countries performing their routines in front of the Olympic crowds while Hitler's regime watched from the stands. The man who had led the Austrian team was dead in a field outside Berlin. No delay, no silence, no acknowledgement that stopped the spectacle even for 1 hour. The show continued because the show was never about the athletes. It was about the image. It was always about the image. It was about showing the world what Germany had quietly become while nobody was watching. And one dead Austrian aviator was not going to interrupt that. Ignaz Stiefsohn felt the wing break and did everything right, and it was not enough. He died for a show that was never really about sport. And the show went on without him, because to the people running those games, he was never really the point to begin with.